Hello friends, I welcome you all again to my audio tutorial. In this audio tutorial, I will tell you about the Indian Council Act of 1861. Now, if we look a bit looking back at my previous audio tutorials, in the Regulating Act of 1773, I told you that the Governor of Bengal was redesignated as the Governor General of Bengal, and at that time the governors of Madras and Bombay presidencies were made subordinate to the Governor General of Bengal. Now, in that process, in the Regulating Act of 1773, the British government tried to centralize the administration of India. Now, in the Indian Council Act of 1861, during that time of 1860s, there was a very radical, a very nationalist type of feeling inside the people of India. The people of India, in the wake of 1858-1857 Sepoy Mutiny, they were a bit more inclined towards getting freedom, and they were very much agitated against the suppression that was made on them by the British government and the East India Company. So, in order to pacify those sentiments, in order to reduce those agitated and radical thinking, the British government thought that it was time that they should include the Indians in the lawmaking process of India. So, in the Council Act of 1861, the first seed towards the decentralization of powers was sown. Centralization reached its full intensity in the Charter Act of 1833, when the Governor General of Bengal was redesignated as Governor General of India, and the governors of Bombay and Madras were deprived of their legislative powers. But in this Act of 1861, one more important feature was that the legislative and political powers of the Madras and Bombay presidencies were restored. Those powers were again given to the presidencies of Bombay and Madras, which were deprived of them in the Charter Act of 1833. So this was the first step towards decentralization, by restoring or giving back the political and legislative powers of the Bombay and Madras presidencies. In this Council Act of 1861, it was said that basically a rule was made in which it was said that the Viceroy would nominate some Indians to his expanded legislative councils as non-official members. That means that in this Act of 1861, Indian Council Act of 1861, the Legislative Council of the Viceroy of India was expanded, and it was told to the Viceroy of India by the British Crown that he should nominate some Indians to his Legislative Council as the non-official members of the Legislative Council. So, going by the law, in 1862, the incumbent Viceroy of India, Lord Canning, nominated 3 Indians to his Legislative Council. They were Sir Dinkar Rao, the Maharaja of Patiala, the Raja of Benares. I repeat, they were Sir Dinkar Rao, second was the Maharaja of Patiala, the third was the Raja of Benares. One more significant characteristic of this act was that some more new legislative councils were formed. Basically, these new legislative councils were formed in the provincial areas. For example, the Legislative Council for Bengal was formed in 1862, the Legislative Council for Punjab was formed in 1897 and the Legislative Council of NWFP, full form North Western Frontier Province, was formed in 1866. The reason of forming these local provincial councils was to make administration more efficient, and many Indians were made the non-official members of these local provincial councils. This act also empowered the Viceroy of India to make a decision without consulting his legislative council if an emergency has been declared in the country. That means that normally the Viceroy used to make decisions after consulting the members of his legislative council. But if an emergency is there, or some sort of armed rebellion is there, or a war is there, then in those circumstances, the Viceroy had exclusive powers that he can issue rules, orders, or ordinances without consulting his legislative council. The validity of such an order or law was 6 months. Now, coming to the last most important characteristic of the Indian Council Act of 1861. In this, a portfolio system was introduced by Lord Canning. Actually, if we go precisely in deep, Lord Canning, the then Viceroy of India, introduced the portfolio system in 1859. But through this Indian Council Act of 1861, the portfolio system was given recognition. Now this portfolio system is very much similar to the system which is now running at the state government level or the central government level. It is very easy to understand and most of us know about it. In the portfolio system, the central minister allots 1 or 2 departments to a certain minister, and the minister to whom that department has been allotted, he has exclusive powers to make final decision regarding the affairs related to his concerned department. So these were the most important characteristics of the Act of 1861. I will repeat them once again. The most important features of the Act of 1861 was that the process of decentralization was started and the legislative and political powers of the Bombay and Madras presidencies were restored. More legislative councils at the provincial levels were formed in Bengal, in Northwestern Frontier Province and in Punjab. Portfolio system, which was introduced by Lord Canning in 1859, was given recognition. This Indian Council Act of 1861 empowered the Viceroy to issue an ordinance without the concurrence of the Legislative Council in case of an emergency, and a rule was made by the British government in which the Legislative Council of the Viceroy was expanded, and in this expanded council, the Viceroy was needed to nominate some Indians as the non-official members of his legislative council. This was done in order to include Indians in the lawmaking process of their country. In 1862, Lord Canning, the then incumbent Viceroy of India, nominated 3 Indians as non-official members to his legislative council. Those 3 Indians were, first, Sir Dinkar Rao, second, the Maharaja of Patiala, and third, the Raja of Benares. So, with this, we wrap up our Indian Council Act of 1861. In my next lecture, I will tell you about Indian Council Act of 1892. I hope you enjoyed the lecture. Thank you. Hello friends, I welcome you all again